Victoria Dowd, it's lovely to welcome you here to the International Festival relating to Agatha Christie. Can I just ask you a little bit about your relationship with her? How did you get into her work and then into the genre?
Oh, I think far too young to be reading murder mysteries. I was about 8 years old and I found a copy of Murder on the Orient Express on my parents' bookcase. And I was immediately just immersed in this world. I didn't know people could sleep on a train. I didn't know who any of these people, Russian princesses, a detective. I was just utterly blown away. And of course, I went to the library with my mom. She always took us to the libraries and said, has this lady, Agatha Christie, written any other books? And that was it. I was, on board from a very young age.
So you spent a long time with Agatha Christie and this golden age of detective fiction. In many of her characters, there's glamour and excitement for some of her characters, aren't there? Not all, obviously. How much do you think was that a form of escapism for Agatha or a reflection of what she was observing in the 1920s and those bright young things?
I think a little bit of both. Obviously, she would have seen in the newspapers all the bright young things, but as a writer and as a single parent as well, she would have had to work very hard and write her books, and she was sort of on the outer edges of that kind of society, looking in, and the glamour of it all is there on display, and she captures that beautifully. But there is always that essence of, would she have liked to have been part of that herself? Perhaps.
And clearly her readers loved it because they kept coming back for more. I mean, she was such a prolific writer.
Very much so. And at times there were 2 books a year. I don't know how she managed it, to be honest. And brilliant plot lines and stories, and the characters that people got so invested in and still are, such as Poirot, Marple, and the other ones like Tommy and Tuppence and Bundle, Brent, of course.
In a previous life, you were a criminal defense barrister. I kind of feel I need to ask, of any of the cases you covered, obviously you can't go into any detail, but of any of those cases you've covered inspired you to include them in your own writing? You must have heard a lot in those courtrooms.
An awful lot, yes. Often there was no mystery to who done it. I did, in one of my books, decide to put a courtroom scene in. But yeah, it was harder to write than actually to be there, because it's often not as exciting as in a novel in a courtroom. But yes, I do draw on some of the cases, not specifically, more the atmosphere and the characters. But I also use the same method of plotting the books as I did when I was plotting a trial, basically. So I have all my murder boards with the string and and the pictures and the maps, and my notebooks are all mapped out in the same way.
That's really interesting because that shows the forensic detail in which you go in terms of plotting your own books. And you've got so many under your belt now. You're an award-winning author yourself. You've recently published your historical crime novel. I just wondered how much of a pivot that was for you to go into that direction rather than stick with the genre or the way that you mapped it out before.
In some ways, it was very similar, because my books that are set in the present day are all very much influenced by Golden Age detective fiction. So they have all those tropes. But what I really wanted to do was write a book set in the Golden Age. And I thought that would be easier to isolate people because they don't have mobile phones, internet, Wi-Fi, etc. But of course, every tiny detail has to be correct historically. So, if she walks in a room, I need to know which shoes she's wearing. And there's an awful lot of research to go into it. And what I didn't want to do was have a character who looked like she just turned up in 1920s fancy dress. I wanted her to be a living embodiment of a woman at that time, and the problems that she would face as a journalist trying to get ahead in 1929. She's a widow, which many women were at the time, very young, and trying to have a career at that time, as Agatha herself was, would have been extremely difficult. So I wanted to have something that readers could relate to as well, and make her very modern.
Bearing in mind you've got the Blood Chronicles, this new series, Are you able to tell us how many more you've got either in the offing or that you've got plotted out?
Well, there is a second one coming next year, which I am at the moment on my first draft of, which feels like it will never be a book, but it will be. It will be one day. And that takes her off. She's hunting for the tomb of Boudica in that one, which has never been found, but she may or may not have found that one. And I'm taking forward a lot of the ideas of she's trying to work in this world where she's not taken seriously. She's a gossip columnist who's trying to move to the front pages and be a serious journalist. And that journey she's going on with that at the same time as trying to make money to live. So yeah, hopefully the second book next year.
So bearing in mind that you've switched careers and you've moved into this crime writing genre, if you had any, have you got a top tip for any budding writer who might be wanting to do what you've very successfully done?
I would say read a huge amount of the genre that you're interested in and also around it as well. I read a lot of other things than crime novels. But I always say, you know, particularly to younger people who want to do it, you wouldn't try to become a tennis player if you'd never watched a tennis match. You know, you've got to read a lot of books and enjoy it and love it and write as much as you can every day. So even if it's some days you just don't feel it, but I still sit down and get some words on the page. They're most likely going to end up in the bin, but it's like how it's a muscle that you have to use. Otherwise, you know, it doesn't work anymore.
Victoria Dowd, thank you.
It's a pleasure. Thank you very much.